I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, more on the President's Conference mission to the Middle East, in which American Jewish leaders visited Turkey and Egypt before the annual meeting of the conference in Jerusalem. If you were with us for part one of our discussion with Conference-Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, you heard Malcolm describe the very positive attitudes expressed by President Erdogan of Turkey and President al-Sisi of Egypt regarding the state of Israel. But now on our JBS phones, I'm most pleased to have Malcolm with us again for part two of our discussion, to focus now on his experiences in Israel itself. Malcolm, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I just want to clarify that President Erdogan and we had a very meaningful exchange. I wouldn't say that he's yet exuberant about Israel, but moving in a different direction than he was for the last couple of years.
Okay, glad you clarified it. All right, talk to me now about, first of all, in general, what was the President's Conference trying to achieve when it got back to Jerusalem and held its annual conference?
Well, this was the 42nd annual leadership mission where we take the top leaders of the Conference of Presidents and, by the way, invite the spouses to come so that they can identify with the work and with the time and the reasons for their spouses being absent from home, and to give them a chance to participate fully in the sessions and the briefings. And we initiated it, as it was said 42 years ago, and it has grown each year. This year we had 105 people, the largest we ever had. And it's a unique opportunity where all the leadership can come together and meet the top leaders of Israel, from the Prime Minister, the President, the Minister of Defense, the leaders of the opposition, the Yair Lapid, and the Mayor of Jerusalem, and explore the issues, to do it in depth. Each one is a different format. They had a dinner at the Knesset with Knesset members, or in the President's house with President Rivlin, or with the University of Haifa with Israeli Arabs, and with student leaders and others talking about BDS, and in Bar Ilan University talking about some of the dangers and threats. We had the Minister of Defense of Greece and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy and others there, Amos Gilad, a very interesting session, and of course the American ambassador. So we had 73 speakers in total, beginning from the Minister of Justice and Netanyahu on the first day, and the head of military intelligence, the head of the Air Force. And each one brings a different perspective. And the reason why it's so important and why we kept expanding the time of our conference was because the issues are so complex, and the challenges that Israel and the world Jewry face are so varied, whether it's the internal challenges, the external challenges of BDS and the rise of anti-Semitism, the destabilizing of the regions, and, of course, this new initiative that we discussed a little bit before about the Mediterranean alternative, which is really catching on, and more countries are expressing interest, and I think can be a stabilizing factor in a very unstable region. But there isn't a single country that doesn't deserve attention, and of course the aftermath of the Iran deal is one of those critical matters that permeates virtually everything.
Okay. First of all, when you describe it, I'm very jealous. Everybody who's listening to this, I'm sure all of us would have wanted to be there. But if we were there, it sounds so vast. It's hard for me to ask you to, pick out one or two issues or people or moments. But I want you to do that for me. First of all, when you talked about the Iran deal, was there any overall theme that kept appearing, whether you were meeting with the Prime Minister, whether you were meeting with a Minister of Justice, whether you were in the President's home, whatever, whenever you were speaking, was there something, one or two things, which somehow you feel, Malcolm, punctuated all the time you and the conference members spent together?
Look, I would say that Iran clearly emerges as the major threat, not exclusive, but when you take the total picture of its aggressiveness in the region, its efforts to undermine other countries that are looking increasingly to Israel, and that was one of the things that I think we see Israel sort of benefiting from, all the negativity in the region and all of the turmoil, because they see it as the island of stability and look to ties, both public and non-public, from Arab countries, from others, Muslim countries. And the fact that the willingness both Sisi and Erdogan, to send out the picture of his meeting with us was seen in Israel as a sign of that, a bit of the sign of that change. Because in the past, this would always be kept quiet and was always off the record, and it was they who put it out, not us. So I would say that the changes in the region, the turmoil, the opportunities that it presents, that Iran's behavior in terms of supporting terrorism, beyond just the nuclear issue, its support of Hamas, Hezbollah, and more groups that we know of, its efforts to destabilize so many of the regimes in the region.
Yes.
Its role in Syria, and the fact that it's made common cause with Russia, but also continuing to arm Hezbollah. And we saw now Russia punishing Iran by denying them the S-300 anti-aircraft system because they had violated the understandings and provided the SA-22, which is a very advanced missile, to Hezbollah that was supplied by Russia. So I would say that the theme of Iran's role, that the economic windfall may not be as great, but you don't need great amounts of money to support terrorism, and the role that it is playing in destabilizing, and that the West has not taken a strong enough stance, I think, in dealing with it and facing up to these realities. And this became very clear to us, and when you ask what was a highlight, when we went to the Lebanese and Syrian borders, and together with the IDF commanders in both areas, and you can look down literally with your bare eye, let alone with binoculars, and you can see them. You see where Hamas is. Hezbollah is. You see where ISIS troops are. You know that, and descriptions of the places within eyesight of where there have been bombings, where there were conflicts, how close this is to Israel's border, and how serious the potential is there. So that was, I think, there's no comparison to seeing something. You can read about it, you can hear about it, but when you see it firsthand, as we did, literally up as close as you could get to it, I think that was had made a dramatic impact on many people.
Malcolm, you had a vast range of Israeli opinion that you heard, left and right. Were there any significant differences in ideology which were important to you and you felt were either surprising or were relevant to the group that you were with? Was there any issue where there was serious disagreement, where whatever the problem being discussed was, it was clear more work had to be done to try to find some common ground?
Well, I think one of the things that surprised people was that there was very little difference about the approach, the current negotiations with the Palestinians, that there was no option now for a two-state solution, that the Palestinians weren't really ready. And this was true for almost everybody who spoke to us, although everybody agreed about the need, including the Prime Minister, that they want to have negotiations, they want to come to an agreement, they would like to see some resolution. A lot of concern across the board, by the way, about, of course, the stabbings, which have continued even as we speak. And there's also a general consensus about the dangers on Israel's borders, about the need to stand up with Hezbollah and Hamas, to be prepared to make the investment, the anti-missile programs that now are being developed and implemented, the most advanced in the world now, that Israel can even take out satellites with the latest new addition to Iron Dome and David Sling, and the need to develop technology for detecting underground activities, especially tunnel building, which we know is going on by Hamas from Gaza, and maybe going on by Hezbollah. It's something Israel monitors. You know that a number of the tunnels, quote, collapsed, and a lot of the workers don't want to go in because they believe Israel has some sort of a device that is operative. But the United States and Israel have both invested a lot of money now in a joint project because America needs it for our borders with Mexico and elsewhere, and Israel obviously needs it. So the defense situation obviously remains a priority, and it's an area of general consensus. There were different assessments about, the nature of the threats, and which is what makes Israel always interesting, that you don't have monolithic points of view. But I think that there were less areas of disagreement than sometimes in the past.
Interesting. Now, was the progress Israel has made, this dramatic progress Israel has made with water, was that at any point a theme that was discussed during your time there?
Oh, sure, and it's made a big difference in Israel's itself. Obviously, it's moved this year to water self-sufficiency. Obviously, the energy discoveries were discussed in our major sector. The immense developments in high technology, and we always have a session that Yossi Bardi, who's one of the fathers of Startup Nation, does each year with us to see all the varied activities. But one of the areas that is very interesting and came up several times is the involvement of the Haredi sector, they call them ultra-Orthodox, whatever, in high tech and in going to universities and in involvement in society in ways that people used to talk about as an aspiration, but it seems really to be developing. Also Israeli Arabs and the role they play. We met with the Druze leaders, met with others who talk about, in very positive ways, what Israel is doing to protect the Druze on the Syrian side. And also when we were up there, we saw how many people are being treated, Syrians who come into Israel. Thousands have been treated in Israeli hospitals, which, of course, nobody writes about and talks about. The tense situation still that exists in the south, obviously near the Gaza border. People are concerned about the tunnels. They're concerned about the rockets that are there. So some of the themes are ongoing and continuing ones, but many new developments that we were able, fortunately, to really explore. And one of the themes of recent years that got much more attention this year is the whole BDS movement and the rise of anti-Semitism.
By the way, in that regard, and this is a slight digression, was there any discussion, or how do you personally respond to the fact that there is a movement here within a segment of the American Jewish community, led by J Street, to block a move in Congress where a bill would be passed that would give the United States the ability to take action against those who are implementing the BDS movement? Many of us are surprised that even J Street would block any attempt to prevent the BDS movement from going forward. Was that in any way a topic of discussion, or do you have any personal thoughts on this?
Well, in Israel, there's a clear consensus about every measure, including the one that's currently in Congress that would empower states to take action and to enable them, to prevent their pension funds, others from investing or divesting from BDS supporters, companies that engage in boycott, divestment, sanctions, which we, and your listeners, I'm sure, know by now, is not about the territories. It's not about 67. It's about 47. About Israel's right to exist, and at its core is anti-Semitism. It's the 21st century incarnation, given the guise of BDS. And, we see now the intersectionality, they call it, about how the BDS movement is hijacking or trying to hijack all sorts of other movements on campuses, from gay rights, the black rights, and others. So those are areas of concern, and I would say that the situation on American campuses was of concern. Of course, the growth of the movement in Europe and was discussed. But the recognition that Israel has a role to play in this, and that the strongest weapon to counter it is exposing Israel to people, is letting leaders, opinion holders, others like we do through America's Voices, come. We take movie stars, television stars, people who tweet, Facebook, and speak. Millions and millions of people listen. Like the stars of telenovelas who are there now, who reach tens of millions of people every day. Mm-hmm. And they encouraged us to do much more of it. The government is investing in these educational efforts and other things just to tell the truth. It's Israel's strongest weapon. But the feeling, and I have to say that there was a lot of sentiment expressed, especially in the session we did about the press, about the distortions and misrepresentations and the fact that many of them don't have local reporters. They rely on stringers who are often Palestinians who may distort or misrepresent. And that session got pretty heated in the exchanges both between them and with the people.
Amazing. By the way, you were not only at sessions, you were on the streets of Israel. And you mentioned that even as we speak now, the stabbings continue, the attacks against Jewish Israelis continue. Malcolm, what was the mood on the street? What was the mood of the Israeli people during your visit this time?
Remarkably resilient. People do not walk with fear. They may avoid certain, dark alleys in the old city, but people went to the Western Wall. They went on tours in the old city. Life continues as usual. And, when an event occurs, it's really isolated. It involves, the victim and then somebody else, but it's in 10 minutes, it's gone. Although the media obviously focuses on it, and that's the only part of the picture you see, is when something occurs and people think that it's widespread. Today, unfortunately, there were a number of incidents, and it is very troubling. Israel is trying to address it. They're dealing with it as best they can, but it's very hard because you can't know where it's going to pop up, and you don't know, who's really behind it. Is it a centralized organization? Is it the incitement on the media and there's in the internet? I mean, there are many potential causes that Israel has to monitor, has to deal with. They try to anticipate, and the fact is that they prevent the vast majority of the planned incidents. But and you know what? That often families will turn in their kids that they believe have or planning to engage in such an activity because they don't want to take the burden. They reject it.
Yes.
But you don't need many people to create, the fear. But I will say that Israelis, when you walk with them, you visit them, this is not even a topic of discussion generally.
Were you ever frightened at any moment in your trip?
Were we ever frightened? No, I can't say that we were. I mean, look, we got good security in Egypt and Turkey. We had, but there was no reason to be concerned, and certainly never in Israel.
Never in Israel. Okay. Malcolm, while I have you, I'm sure you saw that a Pew study just came out of Israeli attitudes. And JTA ran a headline today about how 48% of Israelis want to expel Arabs. The question that was asked was, should Arabs be expelled or transferred from Israel? 48% of Israeli Jews want to expel Arabs, according to the Pew study. Slightly fewer, 46%, disagreed with that notion. Largely, the sentiment came from right-wing Israelis. Almost 3/4, 72% of self-identified right-wing Jews thought that Arabs should leave Israel. 71% of religious Zionists, 59% of Haredi Orthodox Jews. Among left-leaning Jews, only 10%, but 10% also were in favor of some kind of forcible transfer. Number one, was any of this, the treatment of Israeli Arabs, part of the conference that you held in Jerusalem? And in general, how do you respond to the Pew charge here that almost half of Israelis now are in favor or would support expelling the Arab population of Israel?
Was that the total question that was asked? Is that the full text and context for it? I haven't seen it. The only that can make a big difference about what was the setup for the question to know. I mean, obviously it's a disturbing result, but do you know if there was anything more to the question than just those words you quoted?
No, because I have only read excerpts of the Pew study. I have read them, and then I am really quoting from the JTA story. Your question is very, very valid. But I was surprised that 48%
it runs contrary to everything that we heard.
Exactly.
Everything that we saw.
Exactly.
Everything we saw. And in every discussion with Israeli Arabs, do they have complaints? Yes, but you know that this government just allocated more money than any government ever did, that they talk about their integration. You see the officers in the IDF. You see the integration. Certainly the Druze community, praises the rights they have and the situation they have and how Israel is trying to protect the Druze in Syria, etc. There were a number of stories of individuals, Bedouins, others who have risen to new ranks, who have graduated with special degrees, and Israelis take great pride in that. So that's why I question what was the context or if there was anything more to the question. Mm-hmm. Right now, because of the attacks, there is an increase in apprehension and concern, because everybody sees any Arab as a potential stabber, because many of these are kids who come from middle-class families, or come from poor families that were incited Could be in a mosque, could be by the internet, could be by anything else, could be just an argument with their parents, and this is a revenge. But I see how the government is investing in the Israeli Arab community, trying to raise their standards, how private foundations, many are working on this, and we had a whole session, as I said, in Haifa, where people enumerated some of the concerns, some of their problems, but also some of the positive steps, including a representative of the government who outlined the steps that they are taking and are planning to take in even greater measure. So the idea that a significant percentage, almost half, would express that view is surprising. Spoink says that why there has to be more education on all sides. But when you look at the security situation, you understand that why right now those numbers would be heightened.
Well, you know that those who are in any way critical of Israel here in the United States are going to jump on this story and use this figure to argue that the concerns of the Jewish left, that Israel has moved much further right than it once was, and that it does no longer has this embrace of Israel being both a Jewish and a democratic state that welcomes the Arab population that lives there. You know this study is going to be used by those to slam Israel, and I do want
to and denigrate and do many terrible things to Israel, and that's why I think it's important we get the full stance, because everything we saw, you saw how the companies were fighting against BDS because they wanted to keep the Palestinians who lose the jobs. It's not Israelis by and large, and how they suffer for it. Certainly the actions, both in the Knesset and the government, the role. And we see that some of the Israeli Arab members of Knesset have acted in outrageous ways, which alienate part of the population. None of that justifies, though, the statistic that was cited. And yet, I think that more and more people are coming to understand Israel's situation and Israel's defense needs, security needs, etc. But I think in terms of American values and the way that we view the world, this is hard to explain and to assess.
I want to give you also a chance to answer or speak to one other experience I have from time to time, and I'm talking with Jews across the political spectrum all the time, Malcolm. And I spoke to a rabbi for whom I have enormous regard. I believe he's an Ohev Yisrael, but he's on the left. He's part of J Street. And he says quietly, this is not a flaming far left individual. He says to me quietly, look, the way Israel treats the Bedouins and wants to put them in the Negev, the extent to which Israel still does not fund Arab neighborhoods the way it funds Jewish neighborhoods, the extent to which the Israeli Arab is still a second-class citizen. For this rabbi, and he represents many, he argues that while he thinks there are many things wonderful about the state of Israel, on balance, he is as critical of Israeli domestic policy as he is proud. It surprised me to talk to a rabbi who says, I see the downside of Israel on the same plane that I see the upside. I know that you deal with this kind of issue in a global way all the time, but what would you say to that Jewish perspective, which, from my perspective, tragically is right now part of American Jewish life?
Well, first of all, people can be critical of Israel. People can want to see Israel do some things differently or right or wrong, but they really have to know all the facts. They have to know the facts on the ground. They have to know the allocation of funds, what the government has done, how far they have moved, what new initiatives are going on. As we were told, is it enough? It's never enough, but there isn't enough money to do enough for every single community. You have large sectors of the Jewish community in Israel that are disaffected, that have needs that need to be met. Poverty is still a major issue, and you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people still living way below the poverty level. Those are all demands on the government, and they have to be met just as in our country, but no government meets all of the needs. It's not a government policy to discriminate against them. It is not. I think that as we have seen that this Likud government, not a left-wing government, has certainly demonstrated its commitment. And we participate in the interagency task force, which devotes itself, and 80 or more organizations are involved, and foundations who are putting a lot of money into improving a lot of Arabs and others. Bedouin are a unique set of circumstances because of the security situation, because of the efforts to create areas for them to live, cities, because they encroach just on larger and larger areas, and there's no, that they take over, and no government can just allow people to decide what areas that they're going to inhabit. And so I think that there were many years of neglect. There was many years to catch up, but also there has to be a greater effort on their part, and we have to work together. It has to be collective effort. And I think that the diaspora and hopefully foreign governments will also help. They give a lot of money to the Palestinian Authority. They don't do much, for Israel. We see that money not serving a purpose, and you see migration also, people into the Galil and elsewhere from the West Bank, from Jordan. So it is a very complicated situation, security-wise, politically. You have conflicts within the groups themselves, within the Arab groups. So that when we had a spokesman who came in who said very positive things, that he gets criticized and ostracized by others, we have to try, and that's why we are trying to do our part as part of this coalition to see how external funds and external assistance can be brought to bear. We have argued with government on behalf of additional funding for some of these programs. Nobody is indifferent because you got 20% of the population can't be alienated. And I would hope that their leaders will be held more to account when they come out and support Hezbollah, when they come out and support some of the terrorists. Yes. It's unacceptable also. Yes. So, and that alienates population. They say, listen, they're not loyal. They don't want to support that. They applaud the death of Jews or in any way rejoice at it. Then, there has to be a consequence. They say they're not going to be loyal. That is not true of most Israeli Arabs. I think they do want to be loyal citizens of Israel. I think they want to be part of the economy. They want to be integrated, especially for the women. This is a very important drive, and there's a lot to be done.
Malcolm, it is wonderful that you always make time for us. Again, I want everybody to understand you are doing Herculean work on behalf of the Jewish people in the state of Israel and American Jewry. It is always wonderful to get your perspective. You say it better than anybody I could ever have on when you talk about your trip to Jerusalem. I know you're busy, but I've still got to get you into the studio when we do a live show again so the audience can also have at you. But I thank you for your work and for the way in which you are so good to me personally. Thank you very, very much, Malcolm.
It's my pleasure. As you know, I'm a big fan, and listen late at night is when I work. I see the runs and reruns and reruns, which I enjoy. And I actually it sinks in at some point, so I learn a lot. But we're living at a very complex time, at a very sensitive time, and I think people have to be careful with what they say, how they say it. We have to build as many alliances as possible. We have to help educate, whether it's about Israel, it's about the Jewish community. We see the rise of anti-Semitism in America is not immune to it. We see it on our campuses. So the programs you present, the people should take it seriously. They have to evaluate it. Everybody can draw their own conclusions, but do it on an informed basis. And when you speak out, think about what you're saying. Be careful about what you say. Be constructive. And most of all, get involved and try to help change things.
Beautifully said. You be well. We'll speak again very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The thoughts of Malcolm Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. And again, giving us a real sense of what happened in Jerusalem and also speaking to some of the broader issues which we hear discussed in the United States all the time. My thanks, as always, to our Director, Sloan Copeland, Production Coordinator, Serge Goldberg, to the Associate Director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.